The winter storm raged over Silver Creek Valley as 3 shots pierced the howling wind. When the snow settled, 5 of the most dangerous men in Montana lay motionless outside the Silver Peaks Inn. Above them stood a woman in a gray wool dress, her silver-streaked dark hair whipping in the bitter wind. The locals would later say that the most feared force in Silver Creek wasn't the brutal winter storms or the savage mountain lions. It was the quiet widow who ran the inn at the valley's edge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Catherine Mason's day began like any other at the Silver Peaks Inn, with the methodical precision that had become her armor against the past. The 2-story lodge stood proudly at the edge of Silver Creek Valley, its weathered wooden walls and stone foundation a testament to survival against Montana's harshest elements. Every morning she rose before dawn, stoked the fires in each guest room, and prepared breakfast with quiet efficiency that revealed nothing of who she truly was. The routine was her sanctuary, each task another brick in the wall she'd built between her present life and the shadows of her past. The bitter February wind howled through the mountain passes, carrying the scent of pine and approaching snow through the inn's sturdy walls. Catherine stood at the kitchen window, watching the town come to life through eyes that missed nothing. Her simple grey dress and carefully pinned dark hair marked her as a respectable widow, but there was something else in her bearing, something that spoke of a different life, one forged in violence and honed by necessity. "Morning, Mrs. Mason," called Samuel Turner, hurrying past with supplies for his general store, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Will you be joining us for the church social this Sunday?" His enthusiasm barely masked the pity she saw in most townspeople's eyes when they looked at the poor widow who'd arrived 2 years ago after the war had claimed so many good men. Catherine's smile was polite but distant, practiced to perfection. "Thank you kindly, Samuel, but I've got guests to tend to." The same answer she'd given every Sunday for 2 years, ever since she'd arrived in Silver Creek, with nothing but a trunk of memories and secrets, heavy enough to sink a battleship. Inside the inn, memories lurked in every shadow. The mantelpiece held 2 items she never touched but always watched: a tarnished Marine Corps medallion hanging from a silver chain and a faded photograph of James Mason in his dress blues, his kind eyes forever frozen in time. Her dead husband's gaze seemed to follow her as she moved through her morning routine, serving coffee to the traveling salesman, eggs to the elderly couple, and fresh biscuits to the young schoolteacher who always blushed when she passed his table. Dr. Sarah Blackwood sat at her usual place by the kitchen fire, watching Catherine knead bread dough with hands that once knew the weight of a combat knife better than a rolling pin. The morning light caught the silver strands in Sarah's dark hair, marking the years they'd shared together, years filled with unspoken understanding and carefully guarded secrets. "2 years you've been running this inn, Catherine," Sarah said, her coffee cooling forgotten before her. "Don't you ever think about what, Sarah?" Catherine's voice cut through the air like a frozen blade. "About before." Sarah's words were gentle but probing. "About the war, about what you and James did." Catherine's hands stilled in the dough. "That life's dead and buried," she said, each word precise as a surgical strike, "along with the woman who lived it." The words hung in the air like gun smoke, heavy with unspoken grief and harder truths. The conversation died as shouts erupted from outside. Both women moved to the window, watching as 3 riders approached from the north, their horses leaving deep tracks in the fresh snow. Catherine's hand moved unconsciously to her right thigh, where a combat knife used to rest. Muscle memory, betraying years of careful pretense. The movement didn't escape Sarah's notice, but the doctor remained silent, understanding more than most the cost of speaking certain truths aloud. "More travelers for your inn?" Sarah asked. But Catherine was already shaking her head, her face set in lines the doctor hadn't seen in years. "No," her voice had changed, grown harder, colder. "Those aren't travelers." She recognized the type. Men who wore violence like others wore Sunday clothes, comfortable in its familiar weight. The Blackwood brothers rode into Silver Creek like an approaching blizzard, their reputation preceding them, whispered in saloons and telegraph offices across 3 territories. People hurried inside at their approach, doors slammed shut and curtains drawn with the finality of coffin lids. But in her kitchen, Catherine Mason stood straight and still, watching as something inside her, something she'd tried to bury beneath widow's weeds and fresh-baked bread, began to stir. Sheriff Thomas Reed rode past on his morning patrol, his eyes meeting Catherine's through the window. A look of understanding passed between them, heavy with shared knowledge and unspoken warnings. He was one of the few who knew what lay beneath her quiet demeanor, one of the few who remembered who she used to be. His hand rested casually on his holster as he passed the newcomers, marking them, measuring them, just as she did from her window. As the snow began to fall around the Blackwood brothers' horses, Catherine turned back to her bread dough, her movements precise and controlled. But something had changed in the air of Silver Creek Valley, something that whispered of violence to come. "So it begins again," she murmured, and in those words lay the weight of a past about to catch up with her present. The storm clouds gathered over Silver Peak like a warning, and in her immaculate inn, Catherine Mason prepared herself for what she knew was coming. She'd buried her old life once, along with her husband, but some things refused to stay buried, and some women refused to be victims twice. The Blackwood brothers didn't waste time, making their presence known in Silver Creek. By noon, their laughter echoed from the Rusty Nail Saloon, sharp and dangerous as broken ice. Marcus Blackwood, the eldest, sat with his back to the wall, eyes constantly moving, cataloguing every detail of his surroundings. Nathan Snake Blackwood nursed his whiskey at the bar, while Luke, the youngest, amused himself by making the piano player perform with a knife displayed prominently on the wooden surface before him. Catherine watched from her inn's window as Victor the Viper Cole, their enforcer, led their horses to the livery stable. His movements were deliberate, professional, the kind that spoke of military training gone wrong. She recognized the way he walked, the same way she used to move before she buried that life under widow's weeds and respectability. The way his eyes swept the street, noting escape routes and vantage points, told her more about him than any wanted poster could. "They're staying," Sarah observed from behind, her voice tight with concern. The doctor's weathered hands clutched her medical bag, knuckles white with tension. "Yes." Catherine's response was clipped, her fingers absently touching the hidden pocket in her skirts, where she kept a small switchblade, a habit she'd never quite broken. They always do once they find a town worth bleeding dry. Like wolves, finding a flock without a shepherd. The afternoon stretched long and tense, like a drawn bowstring waiting for release. Catherine went about her usual routine, changing linens, preparing dinner for her guests, keeping the accounts in her precise handwriting. But beneath every mundane action lay a current of anticipation, like the stillness before an avalanche. Her other guests had picked up on the tension. The traveling salesman made excuses to leave early, while the elderly couple locked themselves in their room, speaking in whispers. Only young Thomas Wheeler, the schoolteacher, remained, though. His usual blush had been replaced by a pallor that spoke of barely contained fear. It was just past sunset when the first commotion started. Catherine was in her kitchen, checking the stew for dinner, when she heard the shouting from the street, then the sound of breaking glass from Samuel Turner's general store. She wiped her hands clean, moved to the window, and watched as Luke Blackwood stumbled out of the store laughing. A bottle of expensive bourbon dangled from his fingers. Samuel followed him to the door, his face flushed with anger, his normally neat grey hair disheveled. "You have to pay for that." His voice carried across the street. "This isn't some lawless territory. We have rules here, civilization." Luke turned, his young face twisted into something ugly. "Oh, and who's going to make me, that tired old sheriff?" He took a long drink from the bottle, then hurled it against the store's front wall. The sound of breaking glass seemed to echo off. Silver Peak itself, Catherine's hands clenched at her sides, remembering other men, other battles. She watched as Sheriff Reed emerged from his office, moving with deliberate slowness, his coat creaking with each step, the sound carrying in the sudden silence that had fallen over the street. But before he could reach the scene, Marcus Blackwood appeared, placing himself between his younger brother and the law. "There seems to be some misunderstanding." Marcus's voice was smooth as frozen lake ice. "We'll be happy to pay for any damages." He flicked a gold coin toward Samuel. "That should cover it with interest." The coin landed in the snow at Samuel's feet, an insult masked as restitution. The sheriff's hand hadn't moved from his gun. "Money's not the point, Blackwood. This is a peaceful town. We like it that way. And we're peaceful men." Marcus smiled, but it never reached his eyes when treated with respect. The threat in his words hung in the air like storm clouds. Catherine saw it then, the slight nod Marcus gave to someone behind the sheriff. Victor Cole had positioned himself in the shadows of the undertaker's shop, his hand hovering near his. A coat pocket, one wrong move, and Silver Creek would have a dead sheriff on its hands. The town would fall like so many others, becoming just another conquest for men who fed on fear. Without conscious thought, Catherine found herself moving. She stepped out onto her porch, the evening air bitter against her face. Her grey dress whispered against the wooden boards, the sound carrying memories of another life when she'd worn combat boots instead of sensible shoes. "Gentlemen," her voice carried across the street, clear and commanding, "if you're looking for lodging, I have rooms available at my inn. If you're enjoying our tale of the widow's courage, make sure to subscribe. We have more stories of strength and survival coming your way." All eyes turned to her. She felt Marcus Blackwood's gaze like a physical touch, assessing, measuring. She kept her posture relaxed, her face pleasant, the widow offering Christian charity to travelers. But inside, old instincts stirred, reading the positions of every man in the street, noting angles, distances, lines of attack. She could feel the weight of her hidden blade pressing against her thigh like a reminder of who she used to be. "Well now," Marcus's smile widened as he turned fully toward her. "That's mighty hospitable of you, Mrs. Mason, Catherine Mason." She inclined her head slightly. "Clean beds, hot meals, and reasonable rates provided my house rules are respected." Each word was carefully chosen, a gambit in a game she'd played before, though in different theaters of war. Luke laughed, the sound harsh in the gathering dusk. "House rules? In this backwater?" "Shut up, Luke." Marcus's voice carried a warning edge. He studied Catherine for a moment longer, then nodded. "We'd be obliged, Mrs. Mason. My brothers and I appreciate civilization's comforts." The way he said civilization made it sound like a joke. Catherine maintained her smile as they gathered their belongings and approached her inn. Sheriff Reed caught her eye, a question in his gaze. She gave him the slightest shake of her head. This was her choice, her gambit. Better to have them under her roof, where she could watch them, than leaving them free to terrorize the town. As she showed the Blackwood brothers to their rooms, Catherine felt the weight of their presence, like a storm cloud above her carefully ordered world. She'd seen their type before, in another life. Men who confused courtesy with weakness, who saw kindness as an invitation to cruelty. Their boots left mud on her clean floors, a small desecration that promised larger ones to come. "Dinner's at 6, she informed them, her voice neutral. "No weapons at the table, no smoking in the rooms, and no disturbing the other guests." Or what? Luke challenged, leaning against the doorframe with calculated insolence, his hand resting near his knife. Catherine met his gaze, letting her mask slip just enough to show him something in her eyes that made him straighten up. Or you'll find other accommodations. The steel in her voice wasn't entirely hidden now, and she saw recognition flicker across Marcus's face. A predator recognizing. Another of its kind. The winter storm raged over Silver Creek Valley as 3 shots pierced the howling wind. When the snow settled, 5 of the most dangerous men in Montana lay motionless outside the Silver Peaks Inn. Above them stood a woman in a grey wool dress, her silver-streaked dark hair whipping in the bitter wind. The locals would later say that the most feared force in Silver Creek wasn't the brutal winter storms or the savage mountain lions. It was the quiet widow who ran the inn at the valley's edge. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Later, as Catherine locked up for the night, she heard Sarah's quiet footsteps behind her. "You're playing a dangerous game," the doctor warned, her voice barely above a whisper. "No game," Catherine replied, checking the lock one final time. "Just keeping my enemies close." She touched the switchblade in her pocket, a habit born of hard experience and preparing for when they show their true nature. The night settled over Silver Creek like a heavy blanket, but few slept easily. Above the town, Silver Peak stood silent against the star-filled sky, as if waiting to witness what tomorrow would bring. In her room, Catherine sat in the darkness, listening to the heavy footsteps of the Blackwood brothers in the rooms above, and remembered another night when she'd waited in darkness, combat knife in hand, for violence to find her. If this tale of courage speaks to you, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow's story will leave you breathless. Dawn broke over Silver Creek with an angry red sky, painting Silver Peak in colors of blood and fresh snow. Catherine stood at her kitchen window, watching the sun rise while her hands mechanically worked bread dough. She hadn't slept, the weight of the Blackwood brothers' presence above her keeping rest at bay. The floorboards had creaked well past midnight, their boots pacing like caged wolves. The morning brought an uneasy quiet to her inn. The elderly couple had checked out at first light, leaving money on their dresser rather than risk a face-to-face encounter with their new fellow guests. The traveling salesman had vanished even earlier, his room key left on the front desk without a word. Only young Thomas Wheeler remained, his face pale as he hurried through breakfast. "Clearing out like rats from a sinking ship." Marcus Blackwood's voice came from behind her, smooth as a snake's scales. Catherine didn't startle. She'd heard his footsteps on the stairs, counting the rhythm of his approach. "Most folks prefer a quiet company," she replied, not turning from her work. Her fingers kept kneading, though every nerve in her body screamed at having him at her back. "Quiet can be overrated, Mrs. Mason." He moved closer, and she could smell tobacco and gun oil on him. Sometimes a little excitement is just what a town needs, especially a town like this with such an interesting resident. Catherine's hands stilled in the dough. Interesting. She could hear the smile in his voice. Take yourself, for instance, a widow running an inn all alone. It must be difficult, managing everything by yourself. Never know what kind of trouble might come calling. The threat lay on his words like an avalanche waiting to fall. Catherine resumed kneading, her movements measured. "I manage well enough. Mr. Blackwood, coffee's hot if you want it." He chuckled, the sound dark as storm clouds. "You know, the thing about widows is they're often in need of protection, dangerous times we live in." "Indeed they are." Catherine turned then, wiping her hands on her apron. She met his gaze steadily, letting none of her thoughts show on her face, though some dangers are more obvious than others. Before he could respond, shouts erupted from the street. Both of them moved to the window, watching as Luke Blackwood squared off against young Deputy William Hayes outside the saloon. The morning sun caught the deputy's badge, making it shine like a target. "Your brother seems eager for excitement," Catherine observed quietly. "Luke's young," Marcus replied, his tone dismissive. "Hot-blooded, sometimes needs teaching about respect." But he made no move to intervene as his youngest brother continued to bait the deputy. Catherine watched the scene unfold, her heart turning to ice as she recognized the setup. Luke playing drunk and belligerent, keeping the deputy's attention, while Nathan Snake positioned himself casually to the side, one hand resting near his pocket. And Victor Cole, moving through the shadows of the alley behind Hayes, silent as death. She knew their kind and had seen their work before in war-torn villages and desperate towns. They'd start small, a deputy first, then perhaps the sheriff. Once the law was gone, they'd own the town. Samuel's store, the bank, every business would pay for protection. Those who refused would have accidents. She'd seen it happen during the war, seen how quickly civilization could crumble when good. People stayed silent. Before she'd met James and found a different path, she'd been part of a special unit that dealt with such threats. James had believed in law and civilization, in building something better than the world of violence she'd known. And she'd believed in him. Let him show her another way to live. Until the day 3 men like the Blackwoods had taken it all away. The sound of a gunshot cracked through her memory. Deputy Hayes lay in the snow, clutching his shoulder, while Luke stood over him, laughing. The boy's first kill, Catherine realized, watching his face. The moment when a man first learns he can take life and face no consequences. "Shame," Marcus said beside her, his voice carrying no shame at all. "Boy should have shown more respect." Catherine's fingers found the switchblade in her pocket. An old friend offering cold comfort. "Your brother shot an officer of the law." "Self-defense," Marcus shrugged. "Everyone saw the deputy draw first, didn't they, Mrs. Mason?" She turned to face him fully then, letting her mask slip just enough to show him what lay beneath. "I saw nothing, Mr. Blackwood. I was too busy thinking about protection and who truly needs it in these dangerous times." Something flickered. In his eyes, recognition perhaps, or warning. He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy and left her kitchen, his boots echoing a deadly promise. The Blackwood brothers didn't waste time making their presence known in Silver Creek. By noon, their laughter echoed from the Rusty Nail saloon, sharp and dangerous as broken ice. Marcus Blackwood, the eldest, sat with his back to the wall, eyes constantly moving, cataloguing every detail of his surroundings. Nathan Snake Blackwood nursed his whiskey at the bar, while Luke, the youngest, amused himself by making the piano player perform with a knife displayed prominently on the wooden surface before him. Catherine watched from her inn's window as Victor the Viper Cole, their enforcer, led their horses to the livery stable. His movements were deliberate, professional, the kind that spoke of military training gone wrong. She recognized the way he walked, the same way she used to move before she buried that life under widow's weeds and respectability. The way his eyes swept the street, noting escape routes and vantage points, told her more about him than any wanted. Imposter could. When Sarah arrived to tend to the deputy's wound, she found Catherine sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the Marine Corps medallion that normally hung on the mantel. The silver chain pooled around it like a frozen stream, catching the late morning light that filtered through the snow-frosted windows. Her fingers traced the eagle, globe, and anchor emblem, worn smooth from years of similar gestures. Each touch seemed to peel away another layer of her carefully constructed facade. The kitchen, usually alive with the warmth of baking bread and brewing coffee, felt cold despite the crackling fire. Even the usual sense of cinnamon and yeast had been replaced by something harder, metallic, like the taste of approaching violence. "They're not leaving," Sarah said quietly, setting her medical bag down. Her experienced hands, which had tended countless wounds both in the war and after, moved automatically to arrange her supplies. Bandages, laudanum, and suture kit emerged, one by one, a grim reminder of what the morning had brought. Not until they've bled this town dry. No, Catherine agreed, her voice distant as winter wind. They're not leaving. She picked up the medallion, feeling its weight in her palm. The metal had warmed to her touch like it remembered her. But someone is. Sarah's breath caught, recognizing the shift in her friend's bearing. The widow's careful posture had melted away, replaced by something more dangerous, more familiar. Catherine, the woman who wears grey and bakes bread, died the moment they shot that boy. Catherine stood, her movement liquid, predatory, a glimpse of who she'd been before James. Each step across the wooden floor carried the precision of a soldier, the silence of a hunter. Time for the other one to wake up. There's no coming back from that path, Sarah warned, her voice heavy with the memory of other soldiers she'd watched walk similar roads. Not this time. The town needs Catherine Mason. Not what? Sarah? Catherine's eyes met hers, cold as mountain streams. Not the woman who led a special operations unit? Not the one they called the Ghost, because no one ever saw her coming? She slipped the medallion around her neck, feeling the familiar metal like a key, unlocking a door she'd kept sealed for years. That woman never really died. She just hibernated. Catherine moved to the window, watching as Luke and his brothers celebrated at the saloon. Young Thomas Wheeler hurried past, head down, clutching his schoolbooks like a shield. Samuel Turner was already boarding up his broken window, his movements jerky with poorly concealed fear. "I'm not looking to come back," Catherine continued, her voice softer now but no less determined, "just to finish something that should have been finished long ago." Her hand moved to her pocket, where the switchblade James had given her lay waiting, not as a weapon then, but as a tool for her new life, a life he'd helped her build, one peaceful day at a time. Above the town, Silver Peak caught the midday sun, its shadow reaching towards Silver Creek like judgment. For the first time in 2 years, Catherine let herself remember everything, every mission, every skill, every life she'd taken before James had shown her another way. The memories came with surprising clarity, the weight of tactical gear, the rhythm of hand-to-hand combat, the silent signals that could coordinate an entire team. If this tale of redemption and justice speaks to you, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow's chapter will leave you breathless. Her widow's dress suddenly felt like a costume, a disguise she'd worn too long. Each fold of grey fabric seemed to whisper of the lie she'd been living, necessary though it had been. The time for masks was ending. The woman who'd been forged in combat and baptized in blood was stirring, and Silver Creek would soon learn. Why they'd once called her the Ghost, because she could make problems disappear without a trace when the mission required it. "I'll need your help," Catherine said, turning back to Sarah. "Not just as a doctor, as someone who remembers." She moved to the fireplace, reaching behind a loose brick to withdraw a small key. "In my cellar there's a trunk. The combination is James's deployment date." Sarah watched as Catherine's fingers moved over the medallion again, but this time, the gesture wasn't nostalgic, it was purposeful, like a soldier checking their weapon. "The Blackwoods aren't just thugs, are they? There's more to this." "Victor Cole," Catherine nodded. "He's different from the others, professional, military trained, the way he moves, the way he reads a room." She paused, her expression darkening. "I've seen his type before, men who take the skills meant to protect and use them to destroy. During the war, my unit was tasked with handling similar threats." "Your unit," Sarah repeated softly. "The one that officially didn't exist." "The very same." Catherine moved toward the cellar door, each step more purposeful than the last. "We protected towns like this one, dealt with threats that the regular army couldn't or wouldn't handle. The Blackwoods might think they're predators, but they've never faced someone trained to hunt predators. The cellar air was cold and damp as they descended. Catherine's movements became more fluid with each step, muscle memory replacing the widow's careful gestures. In the furthest corner, behind, stacked preserves and wine barrels, stood a heavy trunk. Its surface was dusty, but the lock gleamed as if recently oiled. "Catherine," Sarah said, watching her friend's transformation with a mixture of awe and concern, "what exactly are you planning?" "First, I need to visit an old friend." The trunk's lock clicked open with practiced ease. "Captain Michael Harrison. He's camped up by Cooper's Mine. If anyone knows the Blackwood's weaknesses, it's him." Inside the trunk lay neatly folded tactical gear, weapons maintenance kits, and a folder marked with military codes. Then we remind them why some ghosts are best left undisturbed. Catherine rode out of Silver Creek as the moon rose. Over Silver Peak, her grey dress exchanged for the dark tactical gear that had lain waiting in the trunk. The winter wind cut through the mountain passes like a knife, but she barely felt it. The cold clarity of mission focus had settled over her mind, familiar as an old friend. The switchblade was no longer hidden in her pocket, but strapped openly to her thigh alongside other tools of her former trade. Her horse's hooves kicked up snow that glittered in the moonlight as she followed the old mining trail toward Cooper's Mine. Each hoofbeat seemed to strip away another layer of Catherine Mason, widow and innkeeper, revealing more of Lieutenant Catherine Ghost Wells, Special Operations. Sheriff Reed had given her the information she needed, his words careful but pointed during their brief encounter behind the livery stable. "Man, you're looking for camps up by the old Cooper Mine," he'd said, not asking why she needed to know. "Rides with 2 others. Used to work with the Blackwoods before going his own way. If anyone knows their weaknesses." The trail grew steeper as she climbed, the air turning thin and sharp in her lungs. Catherine remembered another night ride 2 years ago, fleeing rather than hunting. She'd been a different woman then, running from the violence that had claimed James. Now, she was riding toward it, deliberate as a sniper finding their mark. If you're invested in Catherine's journey from widow to warrior, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow's chapter reveals a shocking twist you won't want to miss. The camp appeared exactly where Reed said it would be, a small fire marking its location like a fallen star. 2 horses were tethered nearby, their shapes dark against the mountainside. Catherine recognized military standard setup in the camp's layout. Clear lines of sight, multiple escape routes, defensive positions pre-sighted. This was no civilian's camp. She dismounted quietly, leading her horse the last 100 yards. Her boots made no sound in the snow, a skill remembered from countless night operations. As she approached, a voice cut through the darkness with the authority of command. "That's close enough, unless you're looking to die tonight." A pause, then, "Show yourself slowly, hands where I can see them." Catherine recognized the voice, older, rougher, but unmistakable. "Your perimeter security's getting sloppy, Captain. I counted 3 ways I could have reached you undetected." A longer pause, then the sound of movement. A figure emerged from the darkness, rifle lowered but ready. Captain Michael, Ghostmaker Harrison, stood like a spectre from her past, his face weathered as old leather, his eyes sharp as obsidian under the brim of his hat. 2 decades of special operations had left their mark in the way he moved, the way he held himself, a predator recognizing another of his kind. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed. "Little Cat Wells, though I hear it's Mrs. Mason now." "It was." Catherine stepped into the firelight. The flames caught the Marine Corps medallion at her throat, making it gleam. "Not anymore." Harrison studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward the fire. Something in his expression shifted, recognizing the change in her bearing. This wasn't the grieving widow he'd helped escape 2 years ago. The soldier had returned. "Suppose you better sit down and tell me what brings James Mason's widow up my mountain in the middle of the night." He paused, eyes narrowing. Or should I say, what brings Lieutenant Wells back to the field? The fire cast dancing shadows as Catherine explained about the Blackwood brothers, about Deputy Hayes, about the familiar pattern of violence taking root in Silver Creek. She detailed Victor Cole's military bearing, the precision of his movements, the tactical awareness that marked him as something more than a common thug. Harrison listened without interruption, occasionally stoking the fire with a stick that had been worn smooth by years of use. His eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings, another habit that never quite died. "So," he said finally, "you're looking to get back in the game after all those lectures from James about civilization and redemption." His voice held no judgment, only the weight of understanding. "After everything you did to build a different life, James is dead." Catherine's voice was flat as a frozen lake. "Along with his dream of civilization, the world's still tooth and claw, Captain. I was a fool to pretend otherwise." "Maybe." Harrison pulled a flask from his saddlebag, took a drink and passed it to her. "Or maybe you were right to try for something better. The question is, what are you really after? Justice or just revenge? Does it matter? Matters more than you think." Harrison's voice took on the tone she remembered from years ago, when he'd first trained her for special operations. "Revenge is quick and dirty. Justice, that takes patience, precision, the kind of skill that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of." Catherine took a long drink from the flask, letting the whiskey burn away the taste of bread flour and respectability. "I remember who I was, Captain, who I am." "Do you?" He leaned forward, firelight carving deep shadows in his face. "The lieutenant I knew was wild, reckless, shot first and counted the bodies later. But this," he gestured at her, "this is something different. 2 years of playing widow has changed you, whether you admit it or not." "Changed me into what?" "Maybe into someone who can do what needs doing without losing themselves in the process." He reached into his pack, withdrawing a worn leather journal. "I've been watching the Blackwoods for months. Their patterns, their habits, their weaknesses. Marcus is smart but proud, Luke is quick but reckless, Snake drinks too much by noon, and Cole's the real danger," Catherine finished. "The professional, just like we used to be." Harrison handed her the journal, its pages worn, soft with use. "Study it," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded their unit. "Know them better than they know themselves. The Blackwoods aren't just thugs. They're organized, methodical. They've taken down 3 towns in the past year alone." Catherine opened the leather-bound volume, scanning pages of detailed observations written in Harrison's precise military shorthand. Maps, patrol patterns, behavioral notes. He'd documented everything with the thoroughness that had made him legendary in their unit. "This is why you were ready when I came looking for you," she said, noting the dates in the journal. "You've been watching them for months." "Been watching you too," Harrison admitted, adding another log to the fire. The flames cast stark shadows across his weathered face. "Keeping an eye on my best lieutenant while she tried to build her new life, hoping you wouldn't need the old skills again." He paused, reaching for his rifle to check its action, a habit born of years in the field, but knowing better. If Catherine's past intrigues you, subscribe now. Tomorrow's chapter reveals secrets that will change everything. The wind howled through the mountain passes, carrying the scent of approaching snow. Catherine studied a detailed diagram of the Blackwoods' typical tactical approach, recognizing elements of military strategy that seemed out of place for common bandits. "Cole's been training them," she observed, noting the precision in their formations, taking thugs and turning them into something more dangerous. Harrison nodded grimly. Just like he did during the war. Remember those militia groups he used to organize? The ones that gave us so much trouble in '63, before we caught him. Catherine's fingers traced the patterns on the page. Before, he escaped during transport. And now he's building something new. The Blackwoods are just the beginning. Harrison's voice carried a weight of certainty. He's creating a network, Catherine. Training local gangs in military tactics, organizing them into something larger. Silver Creek isn't just another target, it's a strategic position. Control the valley, control the supply routes to 3 territories. Catherine closed the journal, her mind already calculating angles and approaches. The widow, in her thought of her inn's guests, of young Thomas Wheeler's frightened face, of Samuel Turner boarding up his broken window. The soldier analyzed defensive positions, tactical advantages, potential vulnerabilities. "Show me everything," she said finally. "I need to know what I'm facing." The next hours passed in focused preparation. Harrison led her through combat. Refresher drills, muscle memory returning with each movement. They practiced hand-to-hand in the snow, blade work in the firelight, silent communication signals, half forgotten, but quickly remembered. "Your form's different," Harrison observed as she executed a particularly complex, disarming maneuver. "More controlled. 2 years ago, you would have gone for the quick kill." 2 years of kneading bread changes how you think about precision," Catherine replied, demonstrating the move again, slower. "About patience." "That's what I'm counting on." Harrison retrieved his weapon, checking its positioning. "The woman you were before, she was a weapon, effective but wild. The widow you became, she's a builder, a protector. Now you need to be both." Catherine paused, remembering James's words about building rather than destroying. "What if I can't? You balance them. What if starting down this path means losing everything I built?" Harrison's laugh was harsh as canyon winds. "You think James made you civilized, girl? He just showed you that civilization was worth fighting for, worth killing, or when men like the Blackwoods come to destroy it." He drew his sidearm then, faster than she'd seen him move in years. Catherine's blade cleared its sheath before conscious thought, muscle memory responding to threat. They stood frozen, weapon pointed at her heart, her blade positioned to strike. "See that?" Harrison's voice was quiet now. "That's not the widow. That's not even the lieutenant. That's just you, all of you, the skill and the soul, the violence and the mercy, all working together. That's what you need to be." Catherine held her stance for a long moment, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. Finally, she lowered the blade. "How do I balance it? How do I keep the mercy without losing the edge?" "You don't balance it." Harrison holstered his weapon. "You use both. The widow's patience, her understanding of people, that's what tells you when to act. The soldier's skills, her willingness to do what's necessary, that's what keeps you alive when you do." He moved to his saddlebags, pulling out something wrapped in oiled cloth. "Been keeping these for you? Figured someday you might need them. Again." Catherine unwrapped the package, revealing her old combat knives. The specialized blades had been maintained perfectly, ready for use. The weight felt familiar in her hands, like greeting old friends. "I've got more," Harrison said, watching her test the edges. "Gear, weapons, intel, everything you'll need. But first, you need to be sure. Once you start down this path, there's no going back to just being the widow." Catherine looked up at Silver Peak, its snow-covered heights stark against the star-filled sky. "Maybe I don't need to go back," she said finally. "Maybe it's time to be something new. Something that can protect what James believed in, using everything I am." Harrison nodded, satisfaction glinting in his eyes. "Now you're ready to learn. Now you're ready to become what you need to be." The rest of the night passed in focused preparation. Harrison's training regimen was as demanding as Catherine remembered from their military days, each exercise designed to reawaken skills long dormant. They worked through combat scenarios in the mountain snow, her movements growing more fluid with each repetition as muscle memory returned. "The town's layout works to our advantage," Harrison explained, spreading a detailed map across a flat rock near the fire. The flames cast flickering shadows across the carefully drawn streets of Silver Creek. Multiple escape routes, clear lines of sight from the upper windows. Cole will have noticed the same things. Catherine studied the map, her mind automatically marking defensive positions and tactical approaches. The inn's position is crucial, she noted, indicating the building's location at the valley's edge. Controls access to the eastern pass. That's why they chose it, why Cole directed them there. Smart girl. Harrison's approval carried the weight of years of shared combat experience. He's thinking like a military strategist. Control the high ground, control the supply lines, but that works both ways. He pointed to several locations marked in red ink. "I've already staged equipment caches here, here, and here. Weapons, medical supplies, everything you'll need." "You've been planning this for months," Catherine observed, recognizing the thoroughness of his preparations. The widow in her noticed details that would have escaped the soldier, the placement of caches near civilian safe routes, the consideration for the town's vulnerable points. If you're invested in this tale of justice, subscribe now. Tomorrow brings revelations that will change everything. "The Blackwoods are just the visible threat," Harrison continued, pulling out another journal filled with intelligence reports. "Cole's building something bigger. These attacks on frontier towns aren't random, they're systematic. He's establishing a network, using local gangs as muscle while he installs his own trained men in key positions." Catherine's fingers traced the patterns on the map, feeling the texture of the paper beneath her fingertips, like a military campaign. "Exactly. Take the deputy shooting today. It wasn't just violence for its own sake. It was a tactical move, testing the town's defenses, gauging response times." Harrison's voice carried the analytical tone of a mission briefing. "Cole's using the same strategies we used to employ, but twisted. Where we protected communities, he's infiltrating them. Where we built trust, he instills fear." They moved away from the fire into a small cave where Harrison had established a makeshift armory. Racks of weapons lined the walls, each maintained with military precision. Catherine recognized some of them, specialized equipment from their unit, modified for civilian terrain. "Your old gear's here too," Harrison said, indicating a trunk in the corner. "Kept it ready, just in case. But before you touch any of it, you need to be sure. The widow's skills, observation, patience, understanding people, they're just as valuable as combat training, maybe more so." Catherine lifted a familiar tactical vest, feeling its weight. "I spent 2 years building something. Peaceful," she said quietly. "Learning to create instead of destroy. I won't throw that away." "Good." Harrison's approval was immediate. "Because that's exactly what Silver Creek needs, someone who understands both sides of the equation. Cole expects to face either civilians he can intimidate or soldiers he can outmaneuver. He's not prepared for someone who can be both." They spent the next hours running drills specific to Silver Creek's layout. Harrison had mapped every alley, every roofline, every potential sniper position. They practiced urban combat techniques, modified for the town's unique architecture, emphasizing precision over power. "Your movements are different," Harrison noted as she completed a particularly complex sequence. "More controlled than before. The widow's influence?" 2 years of serving coffee without spilling a drop changes how you think about precision," Catherine replied, demonstrating the move again. "About patterns and timing." "Use that," Harrison advised. Cole will expect the soldier he knew, aggressive, direct. He won't expect someone who can read people like the widow does, who understands the rhythms of civilian life. That's your advantage. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten when they finally paused. Catherine stood at the cave's entrance, watching the first hints of dawn touch Silver Peak. Her body ached from training, but her mind was sharp, focused in a way she hadn't felt since before James's death. "One more thing," Harrison said, retrieving a small box from his gear. Inside lay a communication device she recognized from their special operations days. "Short range, secure frequency. I'll be monitoring from up here, providing overwatch, just like old times." Catherine checked the device's operation with practiced ease. "You're not coming into town." "This is your mission, Lieutenant." Harrison's use of her old rank carried meaning beyond the word. "I'm support only. The town needs to see their widow stand up to protect them, not some old soldier fighting their battles." Catherine nodded, understanding the strategy. The widow's connection to the community would be crucial in what was to come. "Time frame? You've got 3 days before Cole makes his major move. He follows a pattern, establishes control, instills fear, then strikes hard to cement his authority." Harrison's tactical assessment was precise. Use that time. Let the widow observe while the soldier plans. Work both angles. The sun was fully up when Catherine mounted her horse for the ride back to town. The tactical gear was cached in Harrison's cave, but she carried new purpose with her, along with the hidden weapons he'd provided, ones that wouldn't look out of place in a widow's possession. "Remember," Harrison called as she turned her horse toward the trail, "Cole's expecting either the widow or the soldier. Show him neither, and both. That's how you win this fight." Catherine nodded, feeling the weight of the Marine Corps medallion against her chest. As she rode down the mountain, her mind was already working both sides of the problem, the widow's understanding of the town's social fabric meshing with the soldier's tactical analysis. Silver Creek was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a knife. It's someone who knows how to be both shield and sword, protector and warrior, widow and soldier all at once. Catherine returned to Silver Creek. As the morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered valley, the town was already stirring, but something had changed in her absence. Where yesterday people had hurried through the streets with downcast eyes, today she noticed small acts of resistance. Samuel Turner had reopened his store, the broken window now reinforced with sturdy boards. Sarah walked openly between houses, her medical bag prominently displayed, no longer trying to conceal her visits to the wounded deputy. The transformation in the town matched the change in Catherine herself. The widow's careful mask remained, but now it concealed purpose rather than fear. Each observation, each interaction would serve dual purposes, maintaining her cover while gathering intelligence. If this tale of community and courage speaks to you, make sure you're subscribed for tomorrow's revealing chapter. She found Sarah waiting at the inn's kitchen door, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting a sleepless night tending to Deputy Hayes. The doctor's expression shifted subtly as she took in Catherine's altered bearing. "You found Harrison," Sarah said quietly, following Catherine into the kitchen. It wasn't a question. "I did." Catherine moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, but now each action served a tactical purpose. The coffee she ground would give her an excuse to observe the street. The bread she needed would maintain her cover while she planned. "We need to talk, but not here. Gather the people we can trust. Use your rounds as cover. Nobody questions a doctor's visits." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. Years of working together during the war had taught them the value of medical credentials as tactical cover. "Who do you want?" "Samuel Turner, Thomas Wheeler, anyone who's shown resistance to the Blackwoods. But be careful. Cole will be watching. He's smarter than he looks. Catherine paused in her work, fixing Sarah with a meaningful look. Meeting tonight, after dark. The old carpenter's workshop behind the church. It'll look natural enough. People seeking evening prayers during troubled times. As Sarah left to begin her rounds, Catherine turned her attention to preparing the inn for what was to come. Each room became a potential tactical position, each mundane object a possible resource. She noted sight lines from windows, calculated angles of fire, identified potential choke points, all while maintaining the widow's peaceful routine. The Blackwood brothers made their appearance mid-morning, swaggering in for breakfast. Catherine served them with the same quiet efficiency. She showed all guests, but now she catalogued every detail. Luke's hands shook slightly. He'd been drinking already. Nathan's snake favored his left side, an old injury perhaps. Marcus watched her with newly calculating eyes, but his attention betrayed him. Too focused on her, missing the subtle changes in his surroundings. Victor Cole, however, noticed everything. She felt his professional assessment each time their paths crossed, recognized the way he positioned himself to maintain tactical advantage. Here was the real threat. A man who thought like she did, who saw the battlefield hidden beneath civilian life. "Mighty quiet this morning, Mrs. Mason," Cole observed as she poured his coffee. His tone was casual, but his eyes tracked her movements with military precision. "Peaceful times are a blessing, Mr. Cole," she responded, letting just enough tremor enter her voice to reinforce the widow's facade. But she turned her back to him as she spoke. A move that would appear fearful to most, but that any trained operative would recognize as a calculated risk. A test. His slight shift in posture told her he'd caught the significance. The game was on. By late afternoon, Sarah had completed her rounds, spreading word of the meeting through careful whispers and meaningful glances. Catherine spent the intervening hours preparing the carpenter's workshop, arranging tools and lumber to provide cover for their true purpose. Each saw and hammer was positioned to mask the weapons Harrison had provided, cached within easy reach, but hidden from casual observation. As dusk approached, she watched the townspeople begin their evening routines. Thomas Wheeler left the schoolhouse, taking an indirect route that would eventually lead him to the church. Samuel Turner closed his store with deliberate slowness, his movements designed to appear natural while covering his true destination. Others followed, moving in ones and twos, each taking different paths to avoid drawing attention. Catherine herself waited until full dark, when the Blackwoods had settled into their evening drinking at the saloon. She left a lamp burning in her kitchen window, the widow working late, nothing suspicious there. Her grey dress concealed the tactical gear beneath, each weapon carefully hidden but readily accessible. 20 people awaited her in the workshop, faces both frightened and determined in the lantern light. She recognized the mix of emotions. Civilians confronting the possibility of violence, weighing fear against the need to protect their homes. It was a scene she'd witnessed many times during the war in other towns facing similar threats. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice pitched low but carrying clearly in the quiet space. "What I'm about to tell you will change how you see me, how you see our town. But first you need to understand what we're truly facing. The Blackwoods aren't just bandits. They're part of something larger, something more dangerous, and stopping them will require all of us working together." She met each person's gaze, measuring their resolve, gauging their potential. The widow in her knew their stories, their strengths, their fears. The soldier in her assessed their capabilities, their possible roles in what was to come. Both perspectives would be crucial for what she had to build here, not just a resistance, but a community willing to defend itself. "Tonight," she continued, "you'll learn why they used to call me the Ghost. But more importantly, you'll learn how to become something they don't expect, civilians who know how to fight back." The carpenter's workshop transformed into a war room as Catherine laid out their situation. Lantern light cast long shadows across the wooden workbenches, where maps and plans now replaced tools and lumber. The familiar scent of sawdust mingled with the tension in the air as she explained what they faced. "Victor Cole isn't just an enforcer," Catherine explained, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd once used to brief combat teams. "He's a former military strategist who's building something far more dangerous than a common gang. The Blackwoods are just one piece of a larger operation targeting frontier towns across the territories." Samuel Turner leaned forward, his shopkeepers, hands rough against the workshop table. "But why Silver Creek? We're not exactly a wealthy town." "Location," Catherine answered, indicating points on the map spread before them. "Control Silver Creek, control the mountain passes, control the passes, control trade routes to 3 territories." Cole thinks like a military commander because that's exactly what he is. Sarah moved among the gathered townspeople, distributing cups of coffee that would help them stay alert through the long night ahead. Catherine noticed how the doctor subtly assessed each person's resolve, just as she had during triage in field. "Hospitals. If this tale of strategy and survival has captured your attention, subscribe now. Tomorrow's chapter reveals game-changing tactics." Thomas Wheeler, the young schoolteacher, studied the map with surprising intensity. "The school overlooks the main street," he offered quietly. "My second-floor classroom has clear views of both the bank and the saloon." Catherine nodded approvingly. The widow in her remembered his careful attention to detail in maintaining his classroom. The soldier recognized the tactical value of his observation. "Good. We'll need watch points, eyes on their movements, their patterns, but it has to look natural. Nothing that would alert Cole to our preparations." She outlined their strategy, drawing on both her military experience and her intimate knowledge of the town's daily rhythms. Each citizen's normal routine could provide cover for surveillance and preparation. Samuel's delivery runs could disguise the movement of supplies. Sarah's medical visits could mask communication between groups. "But what about when they realize what we're doing?" Martha Chen, who ran the laundry, spoke up. "They've already shot Deputy Hayes for standing up to them." "They expect fear," Catherine answered, letting steel enter her voice. "They expect isolation, every man for himself. What they don't expect is unity, organization, a community that knows how to fight back without looking like it's fighting." She demonstrated basic defensive techniques adapted for civilian use, how a rolling pin could become a weapon, how ordinary household items could provide cover or distraction. Each lesson was carefully chosen to be both effective and deniable, nothing that would obviously betray military training. "Remember," she instructed as they practiced, "the goal isn't to match them in open combat. It's to be prepared without looking prepared, to resist without seeming to resist, until the moment we choose." The night deepened as they worked, the temperature dropping further as snow began to fall outside. Catherine moved among the townspeople, adjusting stances, suggesting modifications. She saw the same transformation she'd witnessed in other civilians. During the war, fear turning to purpose, helplessness to capability. Victor Cole's face appeared briefly at the church's main window, exactly as she'd expected. His patrol of the town was too professional to miss the gathering, but the sight of a parent prayer meeting would fit his expectations. Catherine made sure he saw her leading a hymn, her widow's dress and demure posture masking the tactical discussion that had just concluded. "He'll be watching more closely now," she warned after he'd moved on. "Everything we do from here on must appear completely normal. Maintain your routines. Show the same fear you've been showing. Let them think they're winning." She detailed the signals they would use, ordinary gestures and activities that would carry hidden meaning. A sheet hung to dry in a certain way would indicate trouble. A particular arrangement of flowers in a window would mark a safe house. They were creating a civilian resistance network hidden beneath the everyday life of the town. As the meeting concluded, Catherine held back Samuel Turner and Thomas Wheeler. "I have special tasks for you both," she said, waiting until the others had departed. "Samuel, your store's delivery schedule gives you legitimate reason to move around town. I need you to coordinate between groups, pass messages. Thomas, your schoolhouse position is crucial. I want you keeping detailed notes on their patterns, disguised as lesson plans." Both men nodded, their expressions showing understanding of the risks and responsibility they were accepting. Catherine saw in them what she'd seen in countless civilians during the war. Ordinary people finding extraordinary courage when their community was threatened. "One more thing," she added as they prepared to leave. "If you're compromised, if they suspect anything, you run. No heroics, no last stands. You get to the nearest safe house and wait for extraction. We're not soldiers. We're not trying to be. We're just a community protecting itself." The irony of those words, spoken by a highly trained military operative, wasn't lost on her, but they represented an essential truth. This wasn't a military operation, not really. It was something more complex, a blend of civilian resilience and tactical precision, of community strength and strategic planning. As she walked back to her inn through the falling snow, Catherine felt the weight of both roles she now carried. The widow's intimate knowledge of her neighbors' lives and habits had become as valuable as the soldier's combat skills. Together, they would create something unique, a resistance that didn't look like resistance, a strength that didn't look like strength. The Blackwoods were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who looks dangerous at all. Dawn painted Silver Creek in shades of steel and shadow as Catherine began implementing her strategy. The previous night's snow had left the town draped in white, turning familiar streets into an alien landscape that reminded her of combat operations in mountain terrain. Each footprint now told a story. Each track in the snow revealed movement, patterns that only trained eyes would notice. The Blackwoods made their first move exactly as she'd predicted. Luke Blackwood's voice shattered the morning quiet, echoing from Samuel Turner's store where he was making his usual demands for protection. Payments. But this time, something was different. Samuel's response, while appearing fearful on the surface, carried the steady undertone of a man following a plan rather than cowering in genuine terror. "If you're invested in this tale of resistance, subscribe now. Tomorrow's chapter brings unexpected revelations." "Please, just give me more time," Samuel pleaded, his performance perfect for any watching eyes. His trembling hands and nervous glances were exactly what the Blackwoods would expect. Only Catherine, observing from her inn's window, recognized the subtle signals hidden within his apparent anxiety. 3 fingers brushed against his apron, positions confirmed. A handkerchief dropped and retrieved, weapons cached and ready. Victor Cole stood in the shadows of the saloon's porch, his professional eyes scanning the street. Catherine allowed herself to be seen performing her normal morning routine, knowing he would be watching for any deviation. She carried a basket of linens, her movements deliberately those of a nervous widow rather than a trained operative. But beneath the carefully chosen grey dress, she wore the tactical gear Harrison had provided. "Quite a performance," Sarah murmured. Joining her at the window, the doctor's medical bag contained more than just bandages now, carefully concealed supplies that would look innocent to casual inspection, but could prove crucial in the coming conflict. "They're getting impatient," Catherine replied softly, watching Luke Blackwood's increasingly aggressive gestures. "Cole's pushing them to move faster than they usually would. He senses something's different about this town." Through her inn's windows, she could see her carefully orchestrated resistance taking shape. Thomas Wheeler's students practiced their lessons as usual, but their positions at the schoolhouse windows provided perfect observation posts. Martha Chen's laundry lines created a complex network of signals visible across town, each hanging sheet or drying cloth carrying hidden meaning. The Blackwoods' frustration grew visible as the morning wore on. Their usual intimidation tactics weren't producing the expected results. Shopkeepers still showed fear, still paid their demands, but something had changed in the town's atmosphere. A subtle resistance, like a current flowing beneath frozen water. Problems with the locals. Cole's voice carried across the street as he approached Marcus Blackwood. His casual tone didn't match his alert posture, a detail Catherine noted, with professional interest. "Nothing we can't handle," Marcus replied, but his clenched jaw betrayed his uncertainty. "Just need to remind them who's in charge." "Maybe it's time for a stronger message," Cole suggested, his eyes scanning the street with military precision. Something more decisive. Catherine recognized the shift in their tactical approach. Cole was pushing for escalation, sensing the hidden resistance, but unable to precisely identify it. It was time to implement the next phase of her plan. She gave the signal. Nothing as obvious as a gesture or sign, simply dropping a plate while cleaning. The sound carried across the morning quiet, triggering a cascade of predetermined responses. Samuel Turner immediately began boarding up his store windows, citing fear of violence. Thomas Wheeler hustled his students inside for an unscheduled lesson. Martha Chen began taking down her washing with excessive haste. The town's sudden shift to apparent panic was perfectly choreographed to look natural while accomplishing specific, tactical objectives. Each civilian movement concealed military purpose, defensive positions established, lines of sight cleared, escape routes confirmed. "They're scared," Luke Blackwood laughed, watching the townspeople hurry inside. "Finally," showing proper respect. But Cole's expression showed deeper concern. Catherine saw him noting details that others might miss, the too-perfect timing, the underlying pattern to the chaos. His military training would be warning him that something wasn't quite right, but the very ordinariness of the town's response would make him doubt his instincts. "Mrs. Mason," Cole called out as she closed her inn's front door, "might want to keep your doors locked tonight. Could be some trouble." "Thank you for the warning, Mr. Cole," she answered, letting her voice quaver slightly. "I'll be sure to say extra prayers for peace in our town." Their exchange was a dance of hidden meanings. His warning carried threat disguised as concern. Her response concealed steel beneath apparent submission. Both recognized the other's expertise while maintaining their chosen roles. As darkness approached, Catherine made her final preparations. Harrison's equipment was strategically placed throughout the inn, concealed but accessible. Her guests, all resistance members now, knew their positions and responsibilities. The widow's ordinary evening routine masked a combat team's precise deployment. "They'll move tonight," she told Sarah as they shared a last cup of coffee in the kitchen. "Cole won't be able to resist testing our defenses. He needs to prove his suspicions wrong." "Or prove them right," Sarah added, her doctor's bag ready by the door. "Either way," Catherine smiled, touching the Marine Corps medallion beneath her dress. "They're about to learn that this town isn't what it seems, and neither is its widow." The sun set behind Silver Peak, painting the snow-covered valley in colors of fire and shadow. In her inn, Catherine Mason completed her evening routine with practiced calm, but beneath the widow's peaceful exterior, Lieutenant Catherine "Ghost" Wells prepared for combat. The night ahead would reveal which identity would prove stronger, and which would be needed to save Silver Creek. The winter night settled over Silver Creek like a tactical blanket, providing cover for both predator and prey. Catherine moved through her darkened inn with practiced silence, checking positions and confirming signals. The temperature had dropped sharply, turning the day's snow into sheets of ice that would complicate movement for anyone unfamiliar with winter combat operations. From her position at the second-floor window, she observed the Blackwood's initial deployments. Luke and Snake had taken up positions near the saloon, their attempts at casual lounging betraying their inexperience with covert operations. Marcus moved between buildings with more purpose, but his patterns were predictable, designed to be seen. If this tale of tactical precision has captured your attention, subscribe now. Tomorrow brings revelations that will leave you breathless. Victor Cole, however, had vanished entirely, a fact that concerned Catherine far more than the obvious movements of his companions. A professional's absence often posed more threat than an amateur's presence. "Thomas reports movement near the school," Sarah whispered, appearing silently at Catherine's side. The doctor had adapted quickly to resistance operations, her medical training translating well to tactical communication. Two men trying to look casual but armed. Catherine nodded, processing this information against her mental map of the town. They're establishing a perimeter. Cole's standard procedure: isolate before escalating. She touched the communications device Harrison had provided, confirming it was ready. Signal Martha to proceed with Phase 1. Across the street, Martha. Jen's laundry began to move in the winter wind. To untrained eyes, it would appear that she had simply forgotten to bring in her washing. But each shifting sheet and swaying cloth transmitted specific information to resistance observers throughout the town. The Blackwoods' response was immediate but subtle. Snake repositioned himself to watch Martha's house more directly. Luke's hand moved closer to his weapon, but it was Marcus's reaction that confirmed Catherine's assessment. He immediately looked toward Cole's last known position, seeking direction. "They're nervous," Sarah observed, "more aggressive than usual." "Cole's influence," Catherine replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority of combat experience. "He's pushing them to act faster, harder. Standard counter-insurgency tactic: escalate before resistance can organize." She allowed herself a small smile. "He doesn't realize we're already organized." The first test came just before midnight. Luke Blackwood, likely fortified by whiskey and frustration, decided to create his own initiative. He approached Samuel Turner's store, clearly intending to break in. The store's windows remained dark, appearing vulnerable and unprotected. Catherine watched through her scope as Luke reached the store's front door. Samuel had prepared this scenario carefully under her instruction. The door would appear locked, but yield to moderate force. The interior would seem empty, but provide clear lines of fire if needed. Luke took the bait, shouldering through the door with more noise than necessary. For 3 long minutes, they listened to him moving through the store, becoming increasingly frustrated at finding nothing of value. All valuables had been carefully hidden, leaving only enough merchandise to avoid suspicion. "Now we see if Cole's watching," Catherine murmured, her trained eyes scanning shadows and roof lines. "If he is, he'll recognize this for what it is." As if summoned by her words, a brief flash of movement caught her attention. Victor Cole stood in the shadows of the undertaker's shop, his posture radiating professional disapproval at Luke's amateur behavior. More importantly, his position confirmed Catherine's suspicions about his tactical awareness. "He knows," she said softly. "Not everything, but enough to make him cautious. Signal Thomas to initiate surveillance rotation. I want to know where Cole goes when he thinks no one's watching." Sarah moved away to relay the instructions, her steps silent on the inn's wooden floors. Catherine remained at her observation post, analyzing the scene through multiple lenses. The widow in her noticed how the town's apparent fear masked underlying strength. The soldier recognized the tactical advantage of being underestimated. Luke eventually emerged from the store, his frustration visible in every movement. He had found nothing worth stealing, no easy victory to report. More importantly, he had failed to provoke the response Cole had likely hoped to observe. 4 hours until dawn, Catherine noted, checking her timepiece. They'll make their main move. Soon. Cole won't waste the night's cover. She moved to adjust her equipment, each motion economic and precise. Alert the outer positions. I want every approach watched, every shadow accounted for. The communications network they had established began to function with quiet efficiency. Signals passed between buildings through seemingly innocent means. Lights in windows displaced snow, subtle movements that only trained eyes would notice. Catherine felt the familiar focus of combat operations settling over her mind. The widow's knowledge of the town's rhythms merged with the soldier's tactical awareness, creating something new. Each citizen's normal patterns could be weaponized, each daily routine turned to strategic advantage. A sudden movement near the bank caught her attention. 2 of Cole's men, professionals by their bearing, were establishing positions with clear lines of fire to multiple buildings. Their deployment was too precise to be random, too purposeful to be mere intimidation. They're setting up kill zones, Catherine analyzed, recognizing standard military doctrine in their positioning. Cole's done playing games. He's preparing for serious resistance. She activated her communication device, keeping her voice low. Harrison, are you seeing this? Affirmative, came the captain's response, transmitted from his observation post in the mountains. They're following 3rd Regiment counterinsurgency protocols. Cole's showing his hand. Good, Catherine replied, allowing herself a grim smile. That means he's finally taking us seriously. Time to show him exactly how serious we are. The confrontation began with a whisper of movement in the pre-dawn darkness. Catherine detected the subtle shift in shadows near the bank, recognizing the choreography of a professional military operation. Cole's men had established multiple firing positions, their deployment following standard combat protocols she remembered from her own training. Movement on 3 vectors. Harrison's voice crackled through the communication device. From his elevated position in the mountains, he could observe the entire battlefield Silver Creek had become. They're using 3rd Regiment formations, classic urban control pattern. Acknowledged, Catherine responded softly, her mind already calculating counters to these familiar tactics. Status of civilian positions. If this tale of tactical chess has you on the edge of your seat, subscribe now. Tomorrow's chapter brings the confrontation you've been waiting for. All secure, Sarah reported, appearing silently at Catherine's side. Martha's group is in position. Samuel has the store prepared. Thomas has evacuated all non-essential personnel to the designated safe houses. The town had transformed during the night, its ordinary features assuming tactical significance. Martha Chen's laundry lines now concealed tripwires. Samuel Turner's carefully stacked merchandise created defensive positions and emergency exits. Even Thomas Wheeler's schoolhouse had become a concealed observation post. Catherine watched through her scope as Victor Cole emerged from the shadows near the saloon. His movement pattern confirmed her assessment. He was conducting a final reconnaissance before implementing his main strategy. The widow in her recognized his attempt to appear casual, while the soldier noted his textbook approach to urban combat. "He's good," she murmured, tracking his progress, "using the town's normal patterns against us, just like we're doing to him. But he's missing one crucial detail." "What's that?" Sarah asked, maintaining her position as both medical support and tactical liaison. "He thinks he's dealing with either civilians or soldiers. He hasn't figured out we can be both." Catherine adjusted her position slightly, maintaining her view while remaining concealed. "Signal Thomas to initiate Pattern 3. Let's show them what that means." The response began subtly. Lights appeared in windows across town, but not in random patterns. Each illumination corresponded to normal early morning routines, bakers preparing for the day, workers starting their shifts. But beneath this ordinary activity lay precise military timing. Cole noticed immediately. Catherine saw him freeze momentarily, his professional instincts warning him that something wasn't right. But the very normalcy of the pattern made it difficult to justify aggressive response. This was the advantage of their hybrid strategy, using civilian patterns to mask military precision. "He's calling in his team," Harrison reported. 6 operators moving to support positions. These aren't just gang members, they're trained personnel. Catherine had expected this. Cole hadn't just been building a criminal empire, he'd been recruiting and training a private military force. The Blackwood brothers were just the visible face of a much more dangerous operation. The pre-dawn air carried a bitter chill as Catherine moved to implement the next phase of her strategy. Each step had been carefully planned to use the town's natural rhythms against their attackers. As the first hints of morning began to color the eastern sky, Silver Creek's resistance network activated with practiced precision. Samuel Turner opened his store early, as he often did on delivery days, but his movement served to position armed townspeople in predetermined locations. Martha Chen began her morning laundry routine, each hung sheet creating both visual cover and signal positions. Thomas Wheeler's students, actually grown men and women of the resistance, arrived early for special lessons, establishing a defensive perimeter that looked entirely innocent. "They're responding," Sarah reported, watching through her own observation point. "Luke and Snake are getting agitated. Marcus is trying to maintain control. But Cole understands what he's seeing," Catherine finished. "He recognizes military precision hidden under civilian routine." She checked her weapons one final time, each movement automatic after years of training. Time to push him into making his move. Signal Phase 4. The town's morning routine accelerated slightly, each action carefully calculated to appear normal while increasing pressure on the observers. More lights came on, more people moved about their business, more defensive positions were established. Under the cover of ordinary activities, Catherine watched Cole's reaction through her scope, reading his growing tension in subtle shifts of posture and position. He was too well trained to miss the underlying patterns, too experienced to dismiss them as coincidence. But the very nature of the resistance, neither purely civilian nor obviously military, challenged his tactical assumptions. "He's going to force a confrontation," Harrison warned. "Standard counterinsurgency procedure when facing an unclear threat. Create an incident that will force the opposition to reveal itself." "Good," Catherine replied, allowing herself a grim smile. "Because we're counting on it. This ends today, one way or another." The widow's intimate knowledge of her community had created the perfect cover for resistance operations. The soldiers' tactical expertise had turned that cover into a weapon. Now, as dawn approached Silver Creek, both aspects of Catherine's identity prepared for the coming battle. A battle that would be fought not just with weapons, but with the strength of a community that had learned to be both civilian and soldier, both vulnerable and dangerous. A battle that would show Victor Cole and his men that sometimes the most effective resistance doesn't look like resistance at all. The confrontation erupted with the precision of a military operation and the ferocity of a mountain storm. Cole made his move as the first rays of sunlight touched Silver Peak, launching a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm civilian resistance. His men moved with professional efficiency, securing key positions throughout Silver Creek with textbook military precision. But Silver Creek was no longer just a civilian target. Catherine watched from her carefully chosen position as Cole's strategy unfolded. His operators advanced in standard urban combat formation, using buildings for cover while establishing overlapping fields of fire. Under different circumstances, it would have been an impressive display of tactical expertise. If this tale of strategic warfare has captured your imagination, subscribe now. Tomorrow's chapter reveals the stunning conclusion. Multiple teams converging on primary targets, Harrison reported through the communication device. They're focusing on the bank, the store, and your inn. Classic control point strategy. Confirmed, Catherine responded quietly, noting how Cole had positioned his forces to cut off potential escape routes. Time to show them what they're really facing. Initiate response pattern alpha. The town's response began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Martha Chen's laundry lines suddenly created obstacles that channeled movement in specific directions. Samuel, Turner's carefully positioned supply crates, provided both cover and concealment for resistance fighters. Thomas Wheeler's schoolhouse windows offered perfect firing positions under the guise of ordinary shutters. "Contact at the bank," Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the tension. Two of Cole's operators had encountered unexpected resistance. When trying to secure the building, instead of frightened civilians, they found trained defenders using their knowledge of the building's layout to maximum advantage. Catherine allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as she observed Cole's reaction to this first setback. His posture shifted slightly, professional assessment warring with surprise. He hadn't expected this level of organized resistance, certainly not from what appeared to be ordinary townspeople. "They're adjusting their approach," Harrison warned. "Cole's implementing counterinsurgency protocols. Be ready for escalation." The warning proved timely. Cole's next move demonstrated why he had earned his reputation during the war. His forces began a coordinated push designed to fragment the town's resistance, using tactics that had proven effective against both military and civilian targets. But Catherine had anticipated this. Her hybrid strategy, blending civilian knowledge with military expertise, provided counters to traditional combat approaches. When Cole's men attempted to secure the general store, they found the interior completely rearranged from their previous reconnaissance. What had been clear lines of sight were now blocked by seemingly random displays of merchandise, each positioned with tactical purpose. "Luke's team is pinned down near the schoolhouse," Sarah reported. "Snake is trying to provide covering fire from the saloon, but Martha's group has them contained." Catherine tracked these developments through her scope, noting how the Blackwood brothers' amateur aggression clashed with Cole's professional strategy. This disconnect was creating vulnerabilities she could exploit. Harrison, status of their reinforcements. Two teams holding in reserve, north end of town. Cole's keeping his best operators back, waiting to see what he's really facing. Catherine nodded, though her old captain couldn't see the gesture. This was the crucial moment, the point where Cole would have to decide whether he was facing amateur resistance or something more dangerous. She provided that answer with her next move. "Initiate pattern Delta," she ordered through the communication network. "Show them what a coordinated civilian response really looks like." The town's resistance responded with synchronized precision that would have impressed her old military commanders. Every movement appeared civilian on the surface, while serving tactical purpose underneath. Women drawing water from the town well created a barrier between Cole's forces and their objectives. Children playing in the snow forced his operators to adjust their movements, disrupting practiced formations. "They're splitting up," Harrison reported with professional approval. "Cole's losing control of his tactical cohesion." Catherine watched as Cole's carefully planned operation began to fragment. His operators, trained to deal with either civilian targets or military opposition, found themselves facing something that didn't fit either category. Every apparent advantage revealed itself as a carefully prepared trap. Every standard counterinsurgency tactic was met with responses that shouldn't have been possible from untrained civilians. "Mrs. Mason," Cole's voice carried across the morning air, heavy with realization. "Or should I say, Lieutenant, this is your work, isn't it? I recognize the tactical patterns now." Catherine remained silent, maintaining her position. Cole's recognition of her identity was expected, but it didn't change the strategic situation. If anything, it confirmed that her plan was working. "You've trained them well," Cole continued, his voice carrying genuine professional respect. "Turning civilians into a resistance force while maintaining their cover. It's impressive, but you have to know it won't be enough." The implied threat in his words was clear. Cole had built his reputation on breaking resistance movements, on using superior training and resources to overcome local opposition. But he had never faced a resistance led by someone who understood both sides of the conflict, someone who could be both civilian and soldier, both protector and warrior. "Sarah," Catherine spoke quietly into her communication device. "Signal all positions. Prepare for final phase. It's time to show Cole exactly what a widow's vengeance looks like when it's backed by military precision." The morning sun cast long shadows across Silver Creek as Catherine initiated her final strategy. Each piece had been carefully positioned, each player knew their role, and now it was time to demonstrate the full capability of a resistance that combined civilian insight with military precision. "All positions, execute final phase," she commanded through the communication network. Her voice carried the quiet authority that had once led special operations teams through the war's most dangerous missions. "Remember your training. Move only, as practiced." The town's response was both beautiful and terrible to behold. Every ordinary activity transformed into coordinated tactical movement. Samuel Turner's delivery wagon, loaded with hidden supplies, created a mobile barricade that cut off Cole's southern escape route. Martha Chen's laundry lines suddenly dropped, revealing concealed defensive positions that trapped Luke's team in carefully prepared killing zones. If this tale of tactical mastery has you riveted, subscribe now. Tomorrow brings the explosive conclusion you won't want to miss. "They're realizing it now," Harrison observed through the communication device. "Cole's men finally understand what they're facing, not just trained resistance, but something entirely new." Catherine watched through her scope as the realization spread through Cole's forces. Their professional confidence wavered as they encountered opposition that didn't fit any standard tactical template. Every civilian movement masked military purpose. Every apparently vulnerable position revealed itself as a carefully prepared trap. "Lieutenant Wells," Cole called out, using her old military designation. His voice carried genuine respect beneath its tension. "I should have recognized your hand in this sooner. The integration of civilian patterns with combat tactics, it's your signature, always was." Catherine maintained her silence, but she noted how Cole's operators had begun to bunch together, abandoning their careful dispersal. Fear was eroding their training, making them commit elementary tactical errors. The Blackwood brothers had already lost their composure entirely, their amateur aggression turning to panic as they found themselves contained by forces they couldn't even properly identify. "You've built something remarkable here," Cole continued, clearly trying to locate her position by her response. "But you have to know this can only end one way. I have resources you can't match, support you can't imagine. Stand down now and we can discuss terms." Sarah appeared silently at Catherine's side, her medical bag now converted to a tactical kit. "Thomas reports their reinforcements are attempting to circle behind the schoolhouse. Martha's group has them contained, but they're getting desperate." "Good," Catherine replied softly. "Desperate men make mistakes. Signal phase 2 of the final operation. Let's show them exactly what a widow's vengeance looks like when it's backed by military precision." The town's resistance moved with synchronized purpose that would have impressed her old combat instructors. Every civilian action concealed, tactical movement, Market women drawing water became a coordinated flanking maneuver. Children playing in the snow forced Cole's operators to adjust their positions, herding them exactly where Catherine wanted them. "Mrs. Mason," Marcus Blackwood's voice cracked with desperate bravado. "This isn't what we expected from a widow running an inn. Be reasonable. There's still time to—" His words cut off as Catherine finally revealed her position, not through movement or sound, but through precise tactical action. The inn's seemingly vulnerable windows suddenly bristled with defensive capability. Every apparent weakness transformed into strategic advantage. "This is your only warning," Catherine's voice carried clearly across the morning air, each word measured and precise. "Surrender now, and you'll face proper justice through legal channels. Continue, and you'll learn exactly why they called me the Ghost during the war." Cole's response was immediate and professional, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm her position through superior firepower. But Catherine had anticipated this reaction, had planned for it through countless hours of preparation. "Now," she commanded through the communication network, "show them what a community can do when it learns to defend itself." The town's response demonstrated the perfect fusion of civilian knowledge and military expertise. Samuel's store windows, apparently boarded up in fear, became firing positions that commanded key approaches. Martha's laundry lines, seemingly abandoned in panic, created a maze that channeled enemy movement exactly where the resistance waited. Even Thomas Wheeler's students played their part, their innocent snow fort suddenly revealing itself as a carefully prepared defensive position that trapped Cole's flanking team in a deadly crossfire. "Remarkable," Cole's voice carried genuine admiration beneath its strain. "You've turned the entire town into a weapon. Civilians who can fight like soldiers while maintaining perfect cover. I never thought I'd see it actually work." "You're seeing it now," Catherine replied, allowing steel to enter her voice. "This is what happens when you threaten a community that's learned to protect itself, when you push a widow who remembers how to fight." The winter morning erupted into carefully orchestrated chaos. Cole's forces found themselves caught in a tactical web that turned their own military training against them. Every standard response led them deeper into Catherine's prepared kill zones. Every attempt to regroup exposed them to precisely positioned resistance fighters. "Harrison, status of their reserves?" Catherine's voice remained steady as she coordinated the town's defense from her position in the inn's upper floor. "2 teams pinned down behind the livery stable," the captain reported through the communication device. "Their professional discipline is breaking down. They're starting to realize this isn't a normal civilian resistance." If this tale of tactical mastery has you on the edge of your seat, subscribe now. Tomorrow's chapter brings shocking revelations you won't want to miss. Catherine watched through her scope as Cole attempted to rally his forces. His military expertise showed in how quickly he adapted to the situation, but even his professional experience couldn't fully counter a strategy that blended civilian and military tactics in ways he'd never encountered. "Sarah, report from the outer positions." "Martha's group has contained their eastern escape route," the doctor replied, maintaining her dual role as medical support and tactical coordinator. "Samuel's team holds the south. Thomas reports their northern team is completely cut off." The town's resistance network functioned with precision that would have impressed Catherine's old military commanders. Every civilian movement masked tactical purpose. Market women drawing water became coordinated flanking maneuvers. Children's snow forts concealed defensive positions. Even the morning's routine deliveries served to isolate and contain the increasingly desperate attackers. "Lieutenant Wells," Cole's voice carried across the morning air, tension barely contained beneath professional courtesy. "You've outmaneuvered us. I'll grant you that. But you know this can't last. I have resources beyond what you see here." Stand down now, and we can discuss terms. Catherine's response came not in words, but in action. A series of precisely timed signals transformed the battlefield once again. Martha Chen's remaining laundry lines dropped in sequence, revealing new firing positions that forced Cole's operators to bunch together defensively. Samuel Turner's delivery wagon, seemingly abandoned in panic, became a mobile barricade that cut off their last clear escape route. "They're trapped," Harrison observed with professional satisfaction. "Your hybrid strategy worked perfectly. Military precision hidden under civilian routine. They never saw it coming." But Catherine knew better than to underestimate Victor Cole. A man didn't survive special operations and build a criminal empire without having contingency plans. She watched through her scope as he assessed the situation, noting the slight shift in his posture that preceded tactical decision. "All positions, prepare for their final push," she commanded through the network. "Remember your training. Use the town's layout exactly as we practiced." The response came immediately. Every member of the resistance moved to predetermined positions, maintaining their civilian cover while establishing interlocking fields of fire. The widow's knowledge of the town's daily patterns merged perfectly with the soldiers' tactical expertise. "Mrs. Mason," Marcus Blackwood called out, desperation cracking through his usual arrogance. "Be reasonable. We can still work something out. There's no need for—" His words cut off as Luke Blackwood, panicked beyond reason, broke cover and tried to run. The young man made it 3 steps before finding himself caught in multiple targeting solutions. He froze, finally understanding the true nature of the trap they'd walked into. "Your brothers are amateurs, Cole." Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice carrying clearly across the morning air. "Useful for intimidating civilians, maybe, but not prepared for this. Stand down now or watch how quickly they fall." She could see Cole processing this threat, his tactical mind weighing options and calculating risks. The Blackwoods had already lost any semblance of professional composure. His trained operators were contained and isolated. Every standard military response had been anticipated and countered. "You've changed," he observed, genuine respect coloring his words. "The Lieutenant Wells I knew would have already started shooting. This patience, this precision, it's something new." "Not new," Catherine corrected him. "Just better. The widow taught me things the soldier never knew, about community, about protection, about building something worth defending." Her finger rested lightly on her weapon's trigger, but she maintained her patience. The widow's calm merged with the soldier's readiness, creating something more effective than either alone. "Final warning, Cole. Surrender now. Face proper justice, or discover exactly what happens when military training meets a widow's determination to protect her home." The morning sun cast long shadows across Silver Creek as the moment of decision approached. In her position above the town, Catherine Mason, widow and warrior, protector and fighter, waited to see which path her old adversary would choose, and she was ready for either choice. The tension crystallized in the frigid morning air as Catherine watched Cole make his decision. His military training warred visibly with his current situation, a professional soldier caught in a trap designed by someone who understood both civilian and military mindsets. "Harrison," Catherine spoke quietly into her communication device. "Status of their perimeter positions?" "Completely contained," her old captain replied. "Your hybrid strategy has them boxed in. They're trying to maintain tactical formation, but the civilian elements keep disrupting their standard responses." If this tale of strategic mastery has captured your attention, subscribe now. Tomorrow brings the conclusion that will leave you breathless. She observed through her scope as Cole's operators attempted to regroup, their movements revealing their professional training even in retreat. But every standard military tactic they employed was countered by the town's unique defensive strategy. civilian knowledge of local architecture combined with military precision to turn familiar streets into a tactical maze. Sarah, casualty. Report. 3 minor injuries among the resistance, the doctor responded, maintaining her position near Catherine's command post. Nothing serious. Your training kept our people safe while containing the threat. Catherine allowed herself a moment of satisfaction at this news. The widow's concern for her community had tempered the soldiers' aggressive instincts, creating a strategy that prioritized protection over destruction. Each defensive position had been carefully chosen to minimize risk to both defenders and attackers. Lieutenant Wells, Cole called out again, using her military title. His voice carried the weight of professional recognition. I understand now what you've built here. It's more than just a resistance. It's a new kind of defense force. Civilians who can fight like soldiers while maintaining their cover. It's brilliant. You always were quick to analyze tactical situations, Cole, Catherine responded, maintaining her position. That's what made you dangerous during the war. But you missed something crucial here. And what's that? The difference between military occupation and community defense. She shifted slightly, keeping him in her sights while scanning for any attempted flanking maneuvers. You're thinking like a soldier trying to control civilian territory. I'm thinking like a protector who understands both sides. The morning sun cast stark shadows across Silver Creek as Cole processed this observation. Catherine could see his tactical mind working, reassessing the situation through this new lens. The Blackwood brothers, still frozen in their exposed positions, had become irrelevant to the strategic equation. Your men are contained, Catherine continued, her voice carrying clearly in the winter air. Your standard tactical options have been countered. Every escape route is covered by people who know this town better than you ever could. But they're not just civilians anymore. They're trained defenders protecting their home. She watched Cole's reaction through her scope, noting the subtle shifts in his posture that indicated strategic calculation. His operators maintained in their professional discipline, but she could see the uncertainty in their movements. They were trained to deal with either civilian resistance or military opposition, not this hybrid force that combined elements of both. Sarah, Catherine spoke quietly into her communication device, signal Martha's group to initiate Pattern Delta. Show them exactly what a coordinated civilian defense looks like. The town's response demonstrated the perfect fusion of community, knowledge, and military precision. Market women carrying water buckets suddenly revealed themselves as a coordinated flanking maneuver. Children's snow forts transformed into interlocking fields of fire. Every ordinary morning activity masked tactical purpose. Impressive, Cole acknowledged, genuine admiration coloring his words. You've turned the entire town into a weapon. But you know this isn't over. I have resources beyond what you see here, connections that reach higher than you might expect. You mean your government contacts? Catherine's question carried deadly certainty. The ones who helped you escape during prisoner transport? The corrupt officials who've been supporting your operation? She saw the slight tensing of his shoulders that confirmed her intelligence was accurate. Harrison's months of surveillance had revealed the true extent of Cole's organization, not just a criminal enterprise, but a systematic attempt to establish control over frontier territories through a combination of military precision and criminal intimidation. That information has already been transmitted to trustworthy authorities, she continued. Your network is being dismantled as we speak. This isn't just about defending one town anymore. It's about exposing and ending your entire operation. The widow's patience had allowed her to wait for the perfect moment to spring this trap. The soldiers' tactical expertise had ensured it would be inescapable. Together, they had created something more effective than either could have managed. Alone, Final chance, Cole, Catherine announced, her voice carrying both authority and certainty. Surrender now, or discover exactly what happens when you push a community too far. When you force a widow to remember everything she learned in war while building something worth protecting in peace. The morning air crackled with tension as Cole made his final tactical assessment. Catherine watched through her scope as the experienced operator weighed his diminishing options. His forces were contained, his tactical advantages neutralized, and his larger operation compromised. Yet she recognized the dangerous calculation in his stance. A cornered professional was often the most lethal. Harrison, she spoke quietly into her communication device. Status of outer perimeter. Secure, her old captain replied from his observation post. Sheriff Reed's forces have arrived at the designated positions. State marshals are 20 minutes out. Cole's completely boxed in. If this tale of justice and strategy has gripped you, subscribe now. Tomorrow brings the final chapter you won't want to miss. Catherine maintained her position as she observed Cole process this new development. The arrival of legitimate law enforcement would completely alter his strategic calculations. The widow's patience had allowed her to wait for this perfect moment. The soldier's tactical expertise had ensured it would be decisive. Sarah, civilian status. All non-combatants are secure in the designated safe houses, the doctor reported. Martha's group has established complete coverage of potential escape routes. Samuel's team holds the southern approaches. Thomas has the school fortified and prepared. The town's transformation was now complete. What had begun as a civilian resistance had evolved into something entirely new, a community defense force that combined local knowledge with military precision. Every ordinary citizen had become part of an integrated tactical network while maintaining the appearance of normal daily routines. "Lieutenant Wells," Cole called out, using her military title with newfound respect. "I have to admit, you've outmaneuvered me completely. This goes beyond simple tactical superiority. You've created something entirely new here." "Understanding goes both ways, Cole," Catherine responded, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "You taught your men military tactics. I taught my people how to defend their homes while maintaining their civilian lives. Which do you think creates stronger motivation?" She watched as Cole's operators shifted nervously, their professional discipline eroding as they realized the full extent of their situation. The Blackwood brothers had already lost any pretense of control, their amateur bravado replaced by visible fear. "Your network is exposed," Catherine continued, each word measured and precise. "Every corrupt official, every compromised lawman, every strategic position you've established. While you were focused on controlling this town, we were documenting your entire operation." The widow's dedication to protecting her community had driven her to look beyond the immediate threat. The soldier's strategic thinking had helped her understand the broader implications. Together, these perspectives had created a response that went far beyond simple self-defense. "Tell me something," Cole said, his tactical mind still working. "Despite his deteriorating position, how did you maintain this level of coordination? These people aren't soldiers, yet they move with military precision while appearing completely civilian. Because they're fighting for something more important than military objectives," Catherine answered. "They're protecting their homes, their families, their way of life. I just showed them how to do it effectively." The morning sun had fully risen now, illuminating Silver Creek in stark detail. Catherine could see every defensive position, every carefully prepared fallback point, every element of the trap she had constructed. But more importantly, she could see the determination in her people's faces. Civilians who had learned to be warriors without losing their humanity. "You have no options left, Cole," she stated firmly. Your men are contained. Your operation is compromised. Law enforcement is already moving to secure your other positions across the territory. This ends here." She watched through her scope as Cole processed this information, his military training warring with the tactical reality before him. The Blackwood brothers shifted nervously, looking to him for direction, but their role in this confrontation had become irrelevant. "What happens now?" Cole asked, his voice carrying professional curiosity despite his situation. "You've built something remarkable here, a defensive force that can protect without militarizing, fight without losing its civilian nature. What becomes of it once this is over?" "It becomes what it was always meant to be," Catherine replied. "A community that knows how to protect itself while maintaining its values. A place where widows can bake bread and still remember how to fight when necessary. A model for other towns facing similar threats." The widow's vision of peace merged perfectly with the soldiers' understanding of security. Together, they had created something that transcended both roles, a new way of approaching community defense that honored both civilian life and military precision. "Your call, Cole," Catherine announced, her finger resting lightly on her trigger. "Surrender now, face justice through proper channels, or discover exactly how effectively a community can defend itself when it combines civilian determination with military expertise." The winter morning held its breath as Catherine watched Victor Cole make his final decision. The experienced operator's posture shifted subtly, military training finally yielding to tactical reality. With careful precision, he removed his weapon and placed it in the snow before him. "Stand down," he commanded his remaining forces. "Lieutenant Wells has outmaneuvered us completely. Sometimes the best tactical decision is knowing when you've been defeated by a superior strategy. If this tale of justice and redemption has moved you, subscribe now. More incredible stories await." The Blackwood brothers, their amateur bravado long since evaporated, immediately followed suit. Around them, Cole's trained operators lowered their weapons with professional discipline, recognizing the futility of their position. The morning air filled with the sound of surrendering men and advancing law enforcement. "All positions, maintain coverage," Catherine ordered through her communication network. "Sarah, begin civilian phase. Harrison, coordinate with Sheriff Reed's deputies for prisoner transfer." The town's response demonstrated the perfect integration of civilian and military precision that she had cultivated. Martha Chen's group emerged from their defensive positions while maintaining tactical awareness. Samuel Turner's team secured the surrendered weapons while preserving evidence for prosecution. Even Thomas Wheeler's transformed schoolhouse began its careful return to educational purposes. "Remarkable," Cole observed as deputies secured him. "You've created something entirely new here, not just a defensive force, but a whole new approach to community protection." Catherine descended from her position, the widow's grace now fully integrated with the soldier's alertness. Each step carried the weight of both roles, neither dominating but both contributing to who she had become. "The true strength was always here," she responded, surveying her town with pride. "These people didn't need me to teach them courage or determination. They just needed someone to show them how to use those qualities effectively." Sarah approached, her medical bag once again focused on healing rather than tactical support. "Deputy Hayes is asking for you," she reported. "He wants to understand how his town transformed into something so extraordinary." The morning sun climbed higher over Silver Peak as Catherine watched law enforcement process their prisoners. State marshals had arrived to take custody of Cole and document the evidence of his larger criminal network. The Blackwood brothers, their attempt at criminal empire building shattered, faced justice alongside their more professional colleagues. "Mrs. Mason?" Samuel called from his store's entrance, deliberately using her widow's name rather than her military title. "We're organizing a town meeting for this afternoon. People want to discuss what happens next." Catherine nodded, understanding the deeper question in his words. The town had transformed under her guidance, becoming something that straddled the line between civilian community and defensive force. Its future direction would need careful consideration. "Tell them I'll be there," she replied. "This was never about just stopping one threat. It's about building something that lasts." She touched the Marine Corps medallion that still hung around her neck, feeling the weight of both her past and her future. The widow and the warrior had ceased to be separate identities, merging into something stronger than either alone. Harrison approached, his tactical gear now concealed beneath his civilian coat. "Got word from territorial authorities," he reported. "Cole's network is being dismantled across 3 territories. Your documentation was perfect. Every corrupt official, every compromised position, all of it confirmed." "Good," Catherine responded, watching as her community began its careful transition back to normal life. But this normal would be different, stronger, more prepared, yet still fundamentally civilian in nature. "What you've built here, Harrison," continued professional admiration clear in his voice, "it's going to become a model for other frontier towns. Communities that can defend themselves while maintaining their civilian character, protection without militarization." Catherine surveyed Silver Creek, seeing it through both the widow's loving eyes and the soldier's tactical assessment. The town had changed, but not by becoming a military outpost. Instead, it had found its own unique balance between peace and preparedness. "James would have understood," she said softly, touching her wedding ring. "He believed in building things worth protecting. He just never got the chance to see how protection and building could work together." As the morning progressed, Silver Creek began its recovery. But this recovery wasn't about returning to what it had been. The town had evolved into something new, a community that understood how to defend itself while preserving its fundamental character. Catherine Mason, no longer just a widow or solely a warrior, but a perfect integration of both, walked toward the town meeting. She had found her own balance, just as her town had found its own strength. The ghost of who she had been had merged with the widow she had become, creating something that honored both while transcending either. Above them, Silver Peak stood sentinel, unchanged by the morning's events. But the town that rested in its shadow had transformed forever, becoming a beacon of hope for other communities facing similar challenges. A place that proved you didn't have to choose between peace and protection, between civilian life and defensive capability. A legacy that would endure long after the Ghost's final mission was complete. The winter morning held its breath as Catherine watched Victor Cole make his final decision. The experienced operator's posture shifted subtly, military, training finally yielding to tactical reality. With careful precision, he removed his weapon and placed it in the snow before him. "Stand down," he commanded his remaining forces. "Lieutenant Wells has outmaneuvered us completely. Sometimes the best tactical decision is knowing when you've been defeated by a superior strategy. If this tale of justice and redemption has moved you, subscribe now. More incredible stories await." The Blackwood brothers, their amateur bravado long since evaporated, immediately followed suit. Around them, Cole's trained operators lowered their weapons with professional discipline, recognizing the futility of their position. The morning air filled with the sound of surrendering men and advancing law enforcement. "All positions, maintain coverage," Catherine ordered through her communication network. "Sarah begins civilian phase. Harrison, coordinate with Sheriff Reed's deputies for prisoner transfer. The town's response demonstrated the perfect integration of civilian and military precision that she had cultivated. Martha Chen's group emerged from their defensive positions while maintaining tactical awareness. Samuel Turner's team secured the surrendered weapons while preserving evidence for prosecution. Even Thomas Wheeler's transformed schoolhouse began its careful return to educational purposes. "Remarkable," Cole observed as deputies secured him. "You've created something entirely new here. Not just a defensive force, but a whole new approach to community protection." Catherine descended from her position, the widow's grace now fully integrated with the soldier's alertness. Each step carried the weight of both roles, neither dominating but both contributing to who she had become. "The true strength was always here," she responded, surveying her town with pride. "These people didn't need me to teach them courage or determination. They just needed someone to show them how to use those qualities effectively." Sarah approached, her medical bag once again focused on healing rather than tactical support. "Deputy Hayes is asking for you," she reported. "He wants to understand how his town transformed into something so extraordinary." The morning sun climbed higher over Silver Peak as Catherine watched law enforcement process their prisoners. State marshals had arrived to take custody of Cole and document the evidence of his larger criminal network. The Blackwood brothers, their attempt at criminal empire building shattered, faced justice alongside their more professional colleagues. "Mrs. Mason," Samuel called from his store's entrance, deliberately using her widow's name rather than her military title. "We're organizing a town meeting for this afternoon. People want to discuss what happens next." Catherine nodded, understanding the deeper question in his words. The town had transformed under her guidance, becoming something that straddled the line between civilian community and defensive force. Its future direction would need careful consideration. "Tell them I'll be there," she replied. "This was never about just stopping one threat. It's about building something that lasts." She touched the Marine Corps medallion that still hung around her neck, feeling the weight of both, her past and her future. The widow and the warrior had ceased to be separate identities, merging into something stronger than either alone. Harrison approached, his tactical gear now concealed beneath his civilian coat. "Got word from territorial authorities," he reported. "Cole's network is being dismantled across 3 territories. Your documentation was perfect. Every corrupt official, every compromised position, all of it confirmed." "Good," Catherine responded, watching as her community began its careful transition back to normal life. But this normal would be different, stronger, more prepared, yet still fundamentally civilian in nature. "What you've built here," Harrison Zoe continued, professional admiration clear in his voice, "it's going to become a model for other frontier towns. Communities that can defend themselves while maintaining their civilian character. Protection without militarization." Catherine surveyed Silver Creek, seeing it through both the widow's loving eyes and the soldier's tactical assessment. The town had changed, but not by becoming a military outpost. Instead, it had found its own unique balance between peace and preparedness. "James would have understood," she said softly, touching her wedding ring. "He believed in building things, worth protecting. He just never got the chance to see how protection and building could work together." As the morning progressed, Silver Creek began its recovery. But this recovery wasn't about returning to what it had been. The town had evolved into something new, a community that understood how to defend itself while preserving its fundamental character. Catherine Mason, no longer just a widow or solely a warrior, but a perfect integration of both, walked toward the town meeting. She had found her own balance, just as her town had found its own strength. The ghost of who she had been had merged with the widow she had become, creating something that honored both while transcending either. Above them, Silver Peak stood sentinel, unchanged by the morning's events. But the town that rested in its shadow had transformed forever, becoming a beacon of hope for other communities facing similar challenges. A place that proved you didn't have to choose between peace and protection, between civilian life and defensive capability, a legacy that would endure long after the Ghost's final mission was complete. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.